This is Dan Schneider on this Dan Schneider video interview. The subject is Ava Bounds. She's a 15-year-old actress and filmmaker from the UK, and we will be talking about her budding career. Ava Bounds is a teenage filmmaker from the United Kingdom, and she is here with her father, Brian Bounds, an actor and acting coach. I'm going to be talking about her career as a filmmaker and also as an actress, and also be speaking with her father about his own acting and coaching. He has a method called neuro acting, right? Brian, it's neuro, yeah.
So it's an actor training system, yeah.
So what I like to do is give my subjects a little bit of background to talk about themselves. So let me ask Brian first to give a little background about who he is, and then we'll lead into his daughter, Ava, who's on the right. So Brian, you're an actor and an acting coach. Clearly, you're an American. So how did you end up in the UK teaching our forefathers how to act?
Well, it was an affair of the heart. And I was an actor. I was born in Missouri. I grew up in Texas, and then lived quite a while in Houston, Texas. I got an MFA in acting from the University of Texas at Austin. And by the time I hit the age of 35, I decided, okay, well, if I'm going to be the next Robert De Niro, I either got to go move to New York or I've got to move to LA. And I always fancied moving to New York because of Woody Allen films and all that. So I moved to Queens, lived there for about a year. And then one day I met my wife on the streets of New York, as you do. I was on my way to the gym, just moved to New York. She was on a business trip. We crossed paths. I just moved there. We got lost in Chinatown, Greenwich Village, all over the place. And then it was a tug of war across the Atlantic as to who was going to move to whose country. I moved to the UK back about 21 years ago. And so continued the acting. But then what I realized is that there was a lot of call for actor training for young actors, especially because Ava and Frankie got interested in it. But there's only drama games and improv and let's be a tree and all that kind of crap. And because I was trained in method acting, I started training kids in the village. That grew, and what I realized, because I then had a student who had well, she was neurodivergent. She had Asperger's syndrome. What I developed was a system of training where neuroscience meets method acting, called neuroacting. And so I teach that now with an online course. I've got students all over the world. So it's very practical, very in-depth, very holistic way of actor training. Well, so I divide my time now between individual coaching, teaching groups, doing, let's see, what else? Acting, screenwriting. I've just taken up screenwriting, wrote a screenplay that Ava just directed for the film. And so that's about it, juggling a lot of balls.
So we'll talk a little bit more about neuroacting a little bit more in depth. And I did see, I think it was a clip with your son Frankie, as he seemed more directed into being an actor, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. I do want to ask though, I currently live in Austin, Texas, but I'm from New York. I grew up in Queens. What part of Queens did you live in when you lived there?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Astoria. Just off 47th Street.
Oh, I was on two neighborhoods called Ridgewood and Glendale along the Brooklyn border, Bushwick. If you remember, I don't know how old you are. I'd say you're a little bit younger than me. Back in the 70s, there was a guy named Mayor Koch, and he used to put up these cardboard things in burnt out homes that had potted plants painted on them to make things look good. But you were probably there a bit later during the Giuliani era, it seems, right?
Yeah, it was.
Okay. All right. So Ava Bounds, I discovered her, and I want to just tell you how I discovered you. I have a series of interviews. I have one directors on directing. I think I have 3 or 4 directors. I've got actors on acting, which I've got about 30 actors. And then I also interviewed a woman who's a Canadian singer-songwriter a few months ago, and she's a really terrific songwriter. And I wanted to do a thing where I interviewed Eves, Avas with an A or an E, EWA, just to see if there was any kind of links between, especially creative and or, well, Avas in the arts and sciences. So I stumbled upon you and your acting, and I said, that's very interesting. And your 2 little films that are on line, the one, Players and Beth are the ones that I saw, plus a couple of other acting reels and stuff with you in it. I said, well, she's an interesting one to interview, so that's why I wanted to interview. So now I'm going to ask you, aside from what your dad said, internally within yourself, when did you know that you wanted to be an actor like your dad or your brother?
Well, it started from a very young age. I was always in the school plays and stuff like that, and then I kind of grew out and actually went out of school. I did some plays, and then I did some short films. I was actually in some short films, and then I was lucky enough. I say big, but my final acting role was in the West End, and it was directed by Sam Mendes. It was a play called The Ferryman. And yeah, I really loved acting at that stage. I think I was about 11 or 12. And then after that, I started to make films. I don't know, when I was bored, I picked up the iPad and started to make films. And that's how I kind of grew to love film. Don't get me wrong, I loved acting. It was great. And also, without my dad here teaching me method acting, I would never have been as good as I was. But yeah, I definitely prefer the directing to the acting.
Well, I did see a talent video of you singing Alanis Morissette's "Ironic," and I think you're a solid singer, and you could be good there. And then I saw you acting real. I saw like when you were playing Scout in To Kill a Mockingbird and a couple of other roles. And I think you could be a really good actress. But I'll tell you, both of those two little films, you have an inborn gift for the visual and visual storytelling. And just my take on it is that's, I think, where you could really be a great filmmaker someday. And that's one of the reasons I was interested in speaking with you. I mentioned, or your father mentioned your brother Frank. How many siblings do you have, and are you all actors?
Well, I have one sibling called, yes, Frankie. Yeah, he, the same as me, he quite loved acting. But then I think when he was about 12, he turned to singing. So ever since that, he's been in choirs and especially operas. And now he's training to be an opera singer in university. So he loves the singing side of things.
Because it's interesting. Now, Brian, your wife, is she an actress as well?
No, not at all. She's an entrepreneur. She's a business type. Yeah.
Okay, because in my mind, I don't know if you know, there's a Canadian family called the Fallowses. Megan Fallows is an actress. She played Anne of Green Gables back in the 1980s, and her father, Ted Fallows, and mother were both well-known Canadian actors. So when I saw that, I was just wondering, are the Bounds sort of the Fallowses of the UK? Okay, so let me just then talk a little bit about the two films that you directed, and then we'll talk a little bit about your dad's neuro acting and then some other things. So the short one, it's only like 2.5, 3 minutes. Players is sort of, it's almost like a fugue. I mean, I'm not a musical expert, but you're sort of just propelled into this scene. The characters move back and forth, and then there's, just to give a brief description, there's an odd voice that appears in several of the characters, and it turns out that it might all be in someone's head, or it might be some kind of androids or something. I see in one of your interviews and also online, you said that you come up with the ideas for these two or these three films. I didn't see the one with the 4 girls. I don't know if that's online now, but that you come up with the endings of your films first and then work backwards. Tell me about that first short film a little bit, how you got the idea and all.
Well, when I really didn't take film directing seriously until lockdown happened. And I was really bored, and it was all online school and all this, so I really wanted to create something. And then one day I had the idea for these robotic voices being mixed with actual people. And for some reason, I love to make period films. I never write a script that's not a period film. So I kind of wanted to merge the robotic voices with the period films. And of course, I've grown up with David Lynch and all these surrealistic directors. So I kind of wanted to put that into the mix as well. So then I created a mock-up version of the film where I was playing all the characters. And then I showed my cousin that, and she was like, oh, this is a great idea. You should actually create a better version of it. And then I did. I just rounded up some neighbours and got some costumes and we created it. But yeah, it's kind of a mash of many things, and especially the French
New Wave?
child music as well was a mush of things. But yeah, it just came from the idea of mixing the robotic voices with kind of period characters, if that makes sense.
I wonder what kind of movies influence you? Do you watch like online videos on YouTube? Because I interviewed a couple of directors who did, short 7-8 minute sort of horror films, and they're technically well made. Although yours are very well made, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But they have a certain formula, something happens, a person, and then the film ends with, some monster is staring at them, and they're going to get whacked. Your film ends interestingly too, but it isn't as necessarily predictable. You couldn't have watched it from the beginning and predicted the end. And since I'm assuming that was all your idea and you're working backwards, if you have that ending, do you know how many sort of starts to the film do you think of? Well, I could start this character in an old phone booth, or I could start this character chopping down hay in the field or something. How exactly do you get from point X back to point B?
Well, it's hard to explain. For players, the first version, it didn't really have, how you have that girl who's kind of central character. It didn't have a central character, but then Dad kind of helped me with making it about a central character. But I think it's really, I don't know, it's really hard to explain how I get from the end to the beginning. You just have to try and find, like you said, the most unpredictable way to get to the end. It's like with all of my films, I kind of just, I don't know, a journey back and then try and think of the most unpredictable start, and then I go with that one. It's I don't know, it's a very difficult process to explain.
And is your taste and your ideas, are they influenced by say your brother or your father or things that happen in your life, or do they just come when you're sleeping or you're biking to the next town and I got this idea?
Well, some filmmakers, they stick to making films about kind of what they grew up with. But for me, of course, I wasn't born in the 1900s, although my films are about that. I like to make films about something that I have never really experienced, because that just makes it that much more fun. But these ideas, like these certain ideas that make the movie, they come to me randomly.
Yeah.
I just see a bit of inspiration. And I don't know, sometimes I'm in bed and the idea pops into my head, and then I combine all the ideas to create these films.
Yeah. Now, you're too young probably to be concerned with how a film is going to influence someone in a political sense, or how it's going to be, received by a wider audience, because I would assume that you've sent around to some film festivals, so maybe a few hundred people have seen them in person, and I don't know how many might have seen online, maybe a few thousand. As you get older, what is the direction that, even now at this early age, when you're 25 or 30, do you want to be working for one of the British film studios? I would assume there are still some in Britain. I'm not up on the modern stuff, but I know there were a number back in the 40s and 50s that were quite well known.
Well, it's really hard to get into like a directing role. I think you have to kind of work your way up. So I'm going to go to a film school, a sixth form film school, when I'm 16 in London. So I'm going to learn the kind of cinematography route of the whole filmmaking side. And I think I'm going to get into the industry by being a cinematographer. And then after that, I can hopefully be a director. But I know, as selfish as it sounds, I would like to kind of be in complete control of my films. I don't really want a production company kind of hanging over me. I kind of want to create my own production company, but sometimes that'll just have to wait until I kind of build my name up. But yeah, definitely the end goal is to have my own production company so I can have final cut on all of my films.
Yeah, that's what you need as an artist. It's one of the things that a writer can do. Now, a writer isn't as dependent on financing as a director, but take what you can from that film school. Don't let them take you. If you know what I'm saying. And I think your father would probably agree from what he said earlier. I want to, before I move on to the longer film of yours that I saw, I wanted to ask you, have have you ever watched experimental filmmakers? And this isn't those that will do, like I said, these jump cut scares, and however technically well made they are. Um, People going back, your father is probably more familiar with someone like Jean Cocteau, who would do these surrealist kind of films. The reason I say so is your film uh, reminded me of the plot of a guy named Philip K. Dick, a science fiction writer. Now, he was very plot heavy, but he didn't know how to develop characters. In your second film, Beth, there's a development of the main character. But I wanted to suggest, in case you didn't know, if you look up, there's a woman from the 1940s in America called Maya Deren, Maya, Maya, Deren. She's probably the most famous American avant-garde film director, and she has a film called Meshes of the Afternoon, which is considered from 1943 one of the most influential films. And one of the reasons I'm bringing this up is that I could see you, as you get a little bit older, in your early 20s, college age, if you watch these films, they're very dreamlike, but they aren't the over-top stuff that a Cocteau did. And I can see you with the Beth, and we'll talk about that in a moment. That brought to mind Maya Deren. So I would suggest that you or your father watch these films, because her 6 or 7 most famous films of Maya Deren are online, and I think that they would really be something that you could look to do and expand on, because they're just impressions, and they're visually very stunning for their day. But she never moved beyond that. She was an experimental, where you already have a narrative ability. So I just wanted to throw that out there as an encouragement. So let's talk about the second film, Beth. That's about, what is it, 12, 14 minutes? And that really has a look of a very well budgeted film in its cinematography. There's the scene where a character is walking downhill, and I know, Brian, you did the cinematography, I believe, where a character is walking down a hill and there's a forest, and you see the character's head just bobbing up and down, touching the line of the forest. And that reminded me of shots. There's an American filmmaker named Terrence Malick, and it reminded me of the way Terrence Malick films stuff, especially in what they call that, what is it, where the sun is going down, the magic hour. So yeah, so I don't know if that was your dad's suggestion or your suggestion, or if one of you want to talk about the cinematography, because that, to me, that's really a major portion of that second film.
Could I talk about cinematography?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, just to clarify, Dan, I wasn't the cinematographer on that. I was the cinematographer on Hello Frisco. The cinematography on Beth, this happened all during lockdown itself. Yeah. And so we had a lot of British crew who normally were very busy, who just had time on their hands. So the cinematographer who volunteered to help us, his name is Ben Saffer. And what he taught Ava to do is to come up with a cine Bible, just kind of an idea of what the different sequences we're going to look like, and to give it to give it that sort of Victorian look. Because a lot of filmmakers, I think it's safe to say that Ava wants to take you into a world, as opposed to thrusting a world on you. And being jarring and what have you. Whereas Ben really knew us how to take into that Victorian world. And we were flying by the seat of the pants, because in some of the shots we only had that facility for about an hour, and then we had to get out. So we were dodging lockdown all the way through this thing. But you're right, the cinematography is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
It reminded me of the Malick film Days of Heaven, which was his second film. I don't know if Brian, if you may have seen that. It really has that look, and it does have that immersive quality in it, because of, I guess, you do live around a lot of century or so old villages. So where did you get the idea for that one, Ava? Because it says that it's based on a real tale. Is it real, or is that just the in-universe explanation?
No. Well, usually I tell film festivals that I read the true story, and that's how I came up with the idea. But that's a simple version. One day we have these fields in our house. They're very nice fields, lucky to have them. But sometimes I just walk around them. And then one day I was walking and I just imagined, because actually in the original ending, Beth was sadly meant to get shot in the head. So it doesn't sound very nice. That was the original ending. But yeah, I just imagined this girl walking all this way after she's been on a long journey, and then she being shot, and then this man shouting, "Get off my lawn." So that was actually the original ending to the whole thing until about 2 weeks before filming. And so yeah, the same as players, these little snippets of ideas came to me to create this whole story and this journey of the character. But yeah, that's kind of exactly how the idea came to be. But then I was thankfully persuaded by my family to change the ending to what it was. But then, yeah, I did read the story of Elizabeth Hannah Martin. She was the patient in an asylum only 10 minutes from my house, and that really helped build the character as well. So it is mostly a true story based around a real woman.
Well, one of the things I did find interesting, and I don't know if this was, again, your idea and you're just sort of channeling a great director, or maybe your dad or your mom or some older people on the set maybe gave you some ideas because they are familiar with older films. But your dad is probably familiar with Federico Fellini. And Fellini, in some of his more absurdist or his later works, has what are called Fellini moments, where an animal or something that could be symbolic suddenly appears out of nowhere. And in that film, there's I think it's a little white dog just coming along the ridges there. And I think that's at the moment when the character of Beth realizes something's off, it seems to me. So was that something that you scripted, or was that fortuitous that there was a little dog and you said, let's just keep it in the shot? Or did one of the people suggest, why don't you let my little foo-foo have a moment there? How did the little dog end up?
Well, yeah, I would take credit for that. That was my idea. But the thing is, I don't know. Back about a year ago, I was like, oh, I really want to put my dog in every film because he was in Players and he was in Beth. Tried to get into Hello Frisco, didn't really work. But I don't know, for some reason, I just always put the dog in, and I thought, why not? We'll put it in, and yeah, it clearly worked.
One of the things I did note, especially in the second film, and a little bit more in the first shorter film, you smartly, because it's set in the past, you don't have to worry about mostly copyright stuff. So you can use a lot of that good old music within the films. Are you a fan of old music in general, or was it just you wanted period music for the period piece, and it's good to use copyright-free, public domain stuff?
Yeah, I actually do listen from time to time to old music. I don't know why, I just have this fanciful love for the past in everything, in outfits and music as well. But yeah, as you say, it was a lot easier to have non-copyrighted music. However, for Players, sadly, the music is not completely in the public domain, so we have to contact this, were they French, this copyright company? Yeah. This French copyright company, and go back and forth with them. But yeah, I'm so glad. I like Victorian things, so my music is copyrighted.
So let me just back up and talk with your dad a bit. And well, I'll start with you. You said that in a couple of interviews that you like the theater of cruelty. What exactly is that?
Oh, are you asking me?
Oh, either one. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, one thought that Dan, you wondered about influences. I think Ava may be one of the few filmmakers who was brought up on the Twilight Zone. Oh. And because I love the Twilight Zone. I used to watch it every Friday night at 10:30. And when the kids were about, I think Ava was about 9, we started watching the Twilight Zone. And those were...
The original Rod Serling or the later?
Yeah, Rod Serling.
Okay.
Yeah, the original Rod Serling. Yeah, and those were, individually 23-minute short films. Yeah. And with a very smart, clever, ironic ending. Very, very clever films itself. And so I showed that to the kids. And Ava really, really liked when we used to talk about the endings and what have you. So I think that might have seeped into it. And in some of the Twilight Zone endings, yes, there's an element of confrontation, um, which I guess you might say is, yeah, Artaud's theater of cruelty. It's that it's an assault on the senses for a specific end. None of it's gratuitous, but it's about jarring the viewer, to shake them out of their comfort zone. It's a kind of like Edward Albee, being cruel to be kind, that kind of thing.
Let me just go back a little bit to ask you, Brian, about the neuro acting. So how did you come up with this idea? How does it differ from the standard acting coaches, and how does it differ from the most famous of all, those method acting?
Yes, I was well. Method acting is kind of a catch-all phrase for the type of acting where you're not trying to play a character outside of yourself. You're finding the character within yourself, and that's how I was trained to do that. And when I was training kids for auditions, for productions and self-tapes, what have you, what I noticed is that they all played this generalized wash of emotion, which was very boring. After about 5 to 10 minutes, they weren't actually living the moments. And what I was trained to do is to think that any person is 1,000 times more interesting than any character that you can play. It's about tapping into yourself to do that. So I taught Ava and some other kids to do that using Stanislavski, basically. Objective. You come into a room, you have a want. It's based on what happened to you. And then there's something that's in your way, and then you do something to get what you need. That's basically Stanislavski. So I would train the actors to do that. And then about 5 years ago, I had a student with Asperger's. Her mother called me to take her on to teach her method acting. And I wasn't really aware of Asperger's or neurodivergent students. So I did a lot of research on that. What I found out is that a lot of the social skills that Asperger's students need are just good acting training. In other words, social skills, sensory skills, connecting with another person, compassion, connection, that kind of thing, which a lot of young actors need because we're on phones all the time. Young people, and us adults, we've lost the ability to really connect in an open-hearted, vulnerable way, which the audience wants to see, whether it's on stage or on screen. So I started adapting the method acting training and using neuroscientific exercises to develop their sensory skills, to develop their compassion, their imagination, their expressiveness, so that they're not just frozen below the neck, but they're using their entire body, but they're also aware of the feeling of sitting on the seat. They're aware of touching the doorknob. We've lost a lot of sensory skills, and an actor has to have those to be in the moment, spontaneously going through it. Otherwise, you're going through the same take after take after take after take after take. So I refined that over the course of about 4 years and called it neuroacting, because it is method acting, and it is very practical. Loads of worksheets, a course book, various aids, but it also has exercises to calm the what I call the soul, to calm the soul down so that they can be receptive. So really, the 4 signposts are relax, receive, experience, and express. But if we don't relax, then we're bound up in the limbic system, the fight or flight system, and the shoulders are hunched in. We can't be creative. So we have to relax so that we can receive the impulse from the other actor, then we can experience all those emotions, and then we can express that. So regarding the emotions, there's a technique called alba emoting. I didn't create that, but I use that to create a very high voltage emotion at the beginning of a scene. Sometimes, if you start a monologue going into drama school, you have to be in a state of rage. Well, the bad way to do it is just to make an angry face. The good way to do it is to duplicate the way the human body behaves when we are enraged. The breathing changes, the face changes, the body changes. All of that then generates the emotion that you want. And then you can easily step out of it as well. You don't have to do like a Daniel Day-Lewis and take the character with you for 12 weeks nonstop. You can step out of that emotion at the end of the take.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to affect you like that. So all of that bundled together is neuroacting.
So, but ultimately what ends up on the screen or on the stage is what's important. Are there some actors that you've worked with, like Daniel Day-Lewis, that have to do that stuff, that have to, or some of these actors that famously lost 100 pounds to play a prisoner of war or something? I mean, if it works for that person, it works. You're not suggesting that all actors would benefit necessarily. Some might not from your method, right?
It worked for Emily Belcher, who played Beth in the film. I worked with her on that Alba emoting technique for the past 2 years to help her to get other film roles itself. And, you know, and as you may know, Dan, when you're shooting a film, you never shoot it in order. And you may shoot a very relaxed scene, and then you have a brand new setup, and you have to be in a state of tears. So by working with Emily, as the acting coach on that film, I was able to get her to that emotional breakdown point. And I've had a very high success rate with actors to use this to get into drama schools, to use it on films. Haven't worked with any big names yet on that, but it's certainly in a very competitive industry. I mean, if you are young, if you're female, if you're English, everything is stacked against you about getting into a drama school. But if you can really jump into the audition situation and really knock them away with a raw emotion, then that's much better than just hammy acting.
So when I was going to go back to your daughter, but you brought up a point I just want to pick up on. When you say if you're female and British, the odds are stacked against you, are you saying that nowadays acting schools take in more people from minority backgrounds or foreign backgrounds in the UK rather than native actors?
Well, it's only in the sense that more females are attracted to go into the career than males.
Oh.
So that's why it's more competitive. It's if you're the salmon swimming upstream, if you're a female, it's a lot harder to make that all the way upstream itself.
Okay. So Ava, we briefly touched on Hello Frisco is the film that I guess you currently have in a few film festivals, because you recently did an interview with some other young filmmakers, and that's not online, which I would presume is the contest's way of keeping propriety on that. So let me just tell me a little bit about that film. That's also about the same length as Beth.
Well, actually, it's a little bit shorter. I think it's about 6 minutes long.
Oh, okay.
But again, I was down in the fields, going on a walk, and the idea came to me, and I just imagined these kind of angelic girls. And in that case, the ending didn't come first, actually. The ending came a little bit later. But then my mum gave this weird idea that imagine having a baby in a drain, an old Victorian drain. Because I have all these realistic life-looking dolls from my childhood. So we actually use that as the baby in the film. But then I combined the weird image of the baby in the drain with the angelic girls and with that the weird ending that was going to come later to me. And I made Hello Frisco. And Hello Frisco, it's a weird film. It's got essence of do you know the Marx Brothers? It's kind of crazy and fun, but rather than for men, it's for Victorian young girls trying to save a baby's life. And it has, again, a shocking ending, but I think it's definitely more positive than, more optimistic than Beth. And it leaves a lot of people who've seen it shocked and absurd. And they like the film, but they don't really know why they like the film. So, yeah, that was Hello Frisco.
In interviewing some other indie filmmakers, and I'm talking about people who make movies on $20,000, $30,000 budgets, a lot of them complain about the festival system in general, how a lot of festivals, at least in the U.S., require that you pay some fee, and then you have to do this and that. And some of them have gone around the bend to try to market the films online, and maybe they'll buy out a theater, in their hometown and have a premiere and whatnot. Have you or you, Brian, since you probably know more about the processes of getting into these things, is it really a difficult thing in the UK or Europe? I think you have had you've been to France and other places where you've had the films in some festivals. What is the process, and how difficult or not is it?
Yeah, it's we have a well, Ava has a profile on Film Freeway, which is a portal, and it's a way to have an online presence so that you can submit your films. And so it's we had a sort of a secondary partner to submit the films. And once we did that, we realized, okay, it's just a matter of scouring the film festivals and paying a fee. Generally, it's there are different tiers of film festivals. Of course, Sundance and Tribeca, they're at the top tier, and they are very expensive to get into. But some of them are free to get into. Some of them there's a small fee. But it really, I think it's really down to the freshness and the creativity of the film itself. I think a lot of young filmmakers, they try to make, okay, this is my cop film, or this is my sci-fi film, as if this is my calling card, so that you will hire me to do a feature film. Ava is totally original, and Ava makes films as if she doesn't care how they're received. And I think that's the way David Lynch started out as well. And a lot of the groundbreaking people is they're just, I wouldn't say loose cannons, but they're at the vanguard of creativity. And I think that's why hers are picked up, is because they're so fresh, they're so surprising, that they, and as well, if you have a film that's anywhere from 4 to 6 minutes, it's going to be easier for that to be accepted into a film festival than if you have a half-hour epic.
Yeah. Yeah. I've often said that when I encounter artists, I can tell the people who are the true artists or the real artists or the potentially great artists, because art basically is communication, but it also translates reality. You watch a film, you read a poem, you watch a play, you read a novel, and at the end of it, if it's a really good one and the artist is great, there's something that's different. You're never the same as you were before, because you have a way of looking into whether it's a character like Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver, or whether it's Moby Dick, and Moby Dick isn't just about a bunch of crazy guys going after a whale. It's deeper, it's richer, and that's one of the things that I do sense about Ava. And I want to point out, I watched another video from this Tallgrass Festival. And there was an interviewer. She looked like she was in her mid to late 20s, and four filmmakers, including yourself, Ava. And I tried to look up the films of the other film directors, and nothing against them. All of them were 2 or 3 years older than you. But the thing that I found the most impressive about you was, one, your bearing in talking about your films versus others. And again, this is nothing against these other young people. But also, you were the only one that did a fiction film with actors. 2 of the girls had done documentary films, and then there was a young boy who did a claymation animated film. And interestingly, it's a 21-minute video. I guess you each had about 4 or 5 minutes to speak. But I could tell then, I said, there's something different about you, because you were, the way you talked about your film, you knew, I could tell you knew the films and you knew yourself at that moment. So I don't want to, I just want to ask, have you always been sort of ahead of the game when you were in, 2nd or 3rd grade? Did you always think, oh, look, isn't that interesting? There's 2 anthills battling each other, and there's a praying mantis on top of something. And said that would be an interesting idea, and the other kids are just like picking their noses.
Well, a lot of people in my school at the moment, they're trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives. They're not, sorry to be cruel to them, but they're not really doing much. They're kind of going to school, getting good grades, and that's about it. But yeah, since a young age, I've always kind of been different in that respect. I've always wanted to do something, to make something. And I guess you could say I'm more mature in that way. But in terms of just internally thinking, oh, that could make a great idea of film, I can't see into their heads. So they could possibly be thinking, oh, that could make a great idea of a film or a poem or this or that. It's just they don't express that. Yeah. So I can't really exactly contrast myself to what's going on in their head. But I definitely say from the surface, what you can see on the surface, from a young age, I've been a little bit more mature in the artist kind of direction, I think.
And she's always been creative. I mean, even she does piano as well. But one of her compositions, totally improvised or developed, was, she called it Everest, and she would go to the piano and in a sound way develop this, climbing up to this summit of Everest. And she just did that. We didn't say, why don't you go play the piano, practice your piano. She would just go in and explore different media of creation and expression. And she's been doing that since she was 2 years old.
In one of, I think it was maybe in that interview, or maybe it was something I read online, you said that the next movie that you're working on is about the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. What would interest you about that person?
Well, my dad wrote the script for that, and do you want to talk about how you came up with?
Well, yeah, I wrote a solo drama which was received very well. I had a global tour of that called My Name is Bill, An Afternoon with an Alcoholic. And I always thought, okay, it's a stage play. It's a monologue. It's talking to the audience, one guy bearing his soul in this crisis moment, which is a historical true moment. And I thought, I've always wanted to make a film out of that, but I didn't know how to. I knew that I wanted to take the audience through the head trip that a chronic alcoholic goes through before he or she picks up the drink, which they know will destroy them. Why do they do that? What gets into their head? And so I spent quite a while developing the screenplay, the story for that, and asked Ava to direct it. And this was, when was this?
In the middle of summer, was it?
Yeah, earlier than that we started developing it. And Ava chipped in some very good Fellini. She has, that's the strange thing. Ava has never watched a Fellini film. I'm trying to get her to watch 8.5, but she's dragging her heels on that. However, Ava comes up with Fellini-esque touches quite automatically. That's what's amazing about Ava. And there are some of those touches that I've added into the screenplay itself and into the film. So we shot it about 4 weeks ago, and Ava is editing it right now. It's going to take a while for us to edit it because it is going to be very, I wouldn't say very David Lynch, but it's going to be a head swirling type of thing.
Yeah, I actually I think La Dolce Vita is Fellini's best film. I think it's I would make an argument it might, along with 2001, be the greatest film that I've ever seen. But I actually do have two cats, Cabiria from Nights of Cabiria and Dolce from La Dolce Vita, my two female cats. But I wanted to talk just now some bric-a-brac for the last 15 or so minutes that we speak here, because we'll do about an hour. I did see on a website called Sanctuary, they feature you as an emerging artist, and I don't know if it's the same in the UK. And one of the things I do want to give a couple of pieces of advices to you, Ava, is in the US, emerging is almost always synonymous with minority or female whatevers. You rarely ever see white males who are called emerging artists. They seem to come fully formed, it seems. And so I just wondered, in the UK, maybe Brian knows more about that. Do you see? To me, it's not necessarily a put down, but it's sort of a wink and nod way of saying, oh, this is a woman, or this is a minority person who's emerging, as if only white males can make a film or a work of art that is fully formed. Do you see those kind of little slights in the UK too?
Yeah, it's kind of still a man's industry. And what I've been trying to get across to Ava is that she's going to have to she's already twice as smart, but she's going to have to work twice as hard.
Yeah.
She's going to have to really drive ahead to show the men that she can direct. Now, a growing number of productions have female directors who are now choosing to have female crew. And a lot of the male actors say that there's a completely different atmosphere on the set. It's more collaborative. It's not about showing off.
Yeah. Well, she doesn't have testosterone. She has very little testosterone. That's the thing.
Yeah. However, the thing about an Ava Bounds film is she's almost like Stanley Kubrick, in that Kubrick worked with a small crew, and it was a very quiet set. It was very intimate. It wasn't very chaotic. And we can see what happens when there's a chaotic film set. In the news here recently, tragedies can happen if there is chaos on the film set. But if it's run by a woman, it's more of kind of this kind of organic laboratory. That's how she runs her films.
Yeah, and just so anyone listening in 10 or 20 years, a week or so ago, a film set in the U.S., Alec Baldwin, a well-known actor, accidentally killed an assistant director of a film and wounded the director of a film. And now there's in the U.S. The U.S. is gaga on guns. It's reigniting debates about guns and stuff. So that's just a historical context for someone watching this. Let me just ask a few more questions then, or make a few more points. One of the things that your dad probably knows a bit more is that you never want to believe that you're as good as someone says, or as bad as someone says. You always want to focus on your art, because the rest will fall away. And because I think a lot of times a lot of directors will get praised about something, or a lot of artists, and they keep repeating themselves. And I think to myself, two that come to mind, and I'm not saying they're bad directors, are Tim Burton and Quentin Tarantino, in that they never seem to mature. I mean, Tarantino's the closest he did to an adult film, and I don't mean pornography in adult, but an adult intellectual film, is Jackie Brown. And I don't know if your dad's ever seen that film, or if you have. The rest of it, what a Quentin Tarantino film is going to be like. It's all, and as well made as it might be. And what a Tim Burton is going to have, these childlike qualities, even though he's pushing 70s. Do you have Ava? Do you think in yourself you have like an internal restlessness that if you let's say one of these films takes off and you get to direct a 90-minute feature film for a British company, and then that gets praised, what kind of art do you see yourself doing in different? Do you have that kind of restless mind that you don't want to keep repeating yourself and you that kind of thing?
Okay, well, I created Hello Frisco, as I told you, and then I've been thinking about creating a feature film for quite a while, but not sure what about yet. Yeah. But then Hello Frisco was a success, and then my mom keeps nagging me saying, you should make Hello Frisco a feature-length film because they'll love it. I don't want to make films that are the same, like you said. I want to make different films each time, because if I make them all the same, they won't have that unpredictable ending, will they? So in the future, I would like to make films that screw with the audience, and like you said, change them. So after they walk out of the cinema, hopefully, they'll be different. They'll look differently at life. And I think, I definitely don't want to repeat myself. And then my mother keeps saying, oh, you should make a horror film because they're really in fashion. I don't really listen to people who tell me what films I should make. I kind of go with my intuition, and that's somehow why films are different.
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, what you often see, and Rod Serling is a good example. Rod Serling was a great writer, but he never moved beyond film. He never wrote a great novel or whatnot. And if you watch the original Twilight Zone, you often see 4 or 5 episodes that have similar themes, and 1 or 2 might be great, and the other ones are less. And you're saying, well, he had to crank out a certain amount of episodes per year, and so that's just one thing that I wanted to point out, because you can if an Ava Bounds film always has that twist ending, you risk becoming like a Hitchcock, because everything is gonna. And that's not to say Hitchcock, I don't think he was a bad director, but I wouldn't put him in a league with Fellini, because he was not as he was more predictable, and he was more safe in my view. I did want to ask one other thing here. And I'll ask both of you and see if there's any influence. First, Brian, and then Ava. What particular film or director really has had the biggest impact in your thinking? And then I'll ask Ava. So, Brian.
For me, it is the film. The director is, I mean, you said it, Stanley Kubrick, 2001,
Okay.
because he had the courage to make a film that was a purely visual, sensory experience. There was narration in the film, there was voiceovers in the film, and he cut that out.
Mm-hmm.
He did also what I admire about Kubrick is that he did a ton of research, which is the same as what I did for this latest screenplay, and for the neuroacting as well. So I respect a director who really knows about the world, the universe that they're trying to tell the story of, and then has the courage to not make it conventional, but to make it a visual, sensual experience. And his themes as well. I could go on about Sidney Lumet, but because we watched a fascinating documentary about Sidney Lumet, who, even though he did very different films in different genres, it was always about one person who was fighting for moral ethics. And I just kind of wonder if Ava's going to have that as well, because I'm starting to sense that there is kind of a moral texture within Ava's films as well. But I'd say Kubrick, 2001.
Yeah, Lumet did Serpico, which I mentioned earlier, didn't he? Yeah. So, Ava, what about you? What film that you saw either influenced you the most, or is the film that is like, if I could make a film like that?
I probably have to say David Lynch's Eraserhead, because I just admire how he stretched a surrealistic film over a feature length. Like a lot of surrealistic directors, they create these great 5-minute films, but you couldn't watch them for an hour and a half. They'd just be too confusing and you get lost. Whereas David Lynch, he so skillfully, and it was his first ever debut feature film, I believe, he just so skillfully crafted it. So you never got bored. You never saw what was coming. And the ending, don't get me started on that. Another shocker of an ending too. And I think by watching that, even when I was younger, I just loved creating these, even with, back in the iPad days when I was all the actors and everything, I created these weird, surrealistic films. And I just admired how David Lynch, he showed me it's possible to make a feature-length film. So my dream is to make a feature-length film that has definitely surrealistic elements in, because I think surrealistic films are dying out in modern day. You don't really go to the cinema and see young people going in and watching a film like that. So I want to make it really entertaining for my generation. So
And correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, but I don't think there are any surrealistic female directors. Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, you mentioned the filmmaker in the 1940s.
Yeah, I was
Maya Deren.
Yeah. Well, she was doing with she was. Well, I wanted to bring this up. You mentioned how Ava does a lot of Fellini-like things. Here's how influence works. Google David Lynch, and next to his name, put Maya Deren. David Lynch will cite, you'll see on multiple occasions, that Maya Deren was one of the most influential filmmakers when he saw her stuff in film school in the 60s and 70s. And I have a feeling that if you see her, you'll be like, you'll not only say it'd be in sync, but you'll say, I know what to do more than she did because 70 years have passed, not only within the filmic stuff and the technical stuff, but you have a narrative ability. Her narratives are very dreamlike, and I'll let you experience them on your own if you get a chance. But I think that's someone that will very much influence you. As far as like commercial filmmakers, I don't think so. Most of the female directors in the 40s and 50s that were in charge, well, most of the females that were in charge were people like Betty Davis, although there were a few filmmakers here were there. I do want to mention one other film that you should watch, and it's a British film, and it's a science fiction film from the early 60s called Unearthly Stranger, or The Unearthly Stranger. And it's about an alien invasion, but it's a very low budget film. No big special effects, no anything. But now you could do special effects. And the really good thing about it when you watch it, and you can watch it on YouTube, it's in the public domain, I believe, Unearthly Stranger. The ending is a very much an ending that reminds me of you, but it's also a very female-centric film from the 1960s in Britain. So Unearthly Stranger, and that's one of the things I would also say is, don't be ashamed to watch B films or stuff that people consider crap, because if you have the talent, you can make crap into something high art. And I think, and my opinion is, I think that you have that, and I hope you keep that. So I just wanted to say, it was a pleasure interviewing both of you. I'll link to several of Ava's and also websites and your neuroacting stuff. And hopefully in 10 or 15 years, once you have a Cannes Festival entry or something, you'll come back to me and remember me, and don't forget the little people. So thank you.
Thank you for the advice.